Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 54th edition of Data Bites, hosted by Public Digital. I'm Gavin Freegard, and it's wonderful to see so many of you this evening here at Broadway House and online. Tonight's event is an environment and sustainability special. Good to see we've got some fans of the environment in tonight. Let's start in the usual way. Hands up if this is your first Data Bites. Welcome. Hands up if you've been to Data Bites before. Welcome back. And hands up if you came to this, the first ever Data Bites back in April 2019. We do have a couple in the room. Congratulations, I think. Yes, tonight is 6 years to the day since the very first Data Bites. Think back to 6 years ago, the height of Brexit madness, if you can. We all had to care much more about trade and tariffs than we'd ever expected. Donald Trump was causing chaos in the White House. Data and digital tech was going to transform government. The Lib Dems and Nigel Farage were eyeing imminent elections with confidence. The Tories were in disarray, and the Labour Party didn't seem to know what they were doing. How times have changed. Let's start with some housekeeping. We are on the record and are being live streamed, obviously. If you're on social media, the hashtag is PDDataBites. And you can put your questions to our speakers via Slido, bit.ly/databytes54, all lowercase. If you're here in the room, you can, of course, raise your hand as well. What does DataBites do? We aim to put good work involving data on the record so we can all learn from it, provide a space for the different data communities in and around government to come together, and bring to life what better data can do for all of us, whether we think of ourselves as data people or not. How does DataBites work? This evening, you're going to be treated to 4 presentations on interesting data projects. Each of our speakers will have 8 minutes to present. Yes, just 8 minutes. There are 8 bits in a byte, hence 8 minutes in a data byte. Each speaker will then take questions for 8 minutes. Yes, just 8 minutes. And then we move on to the next speaker. So 4 presentations of 8 minutes, each followed by questions for 8 minutes. You can watch the previous 4 Data Bites at Public Digital, including last month's, at bit.ly/PDDataBites, all lowercase. The 49 before that were at the Institute for Government. You can watch those at bit.ly/IFGDataBites, capital IFGDB. That includes number 1, 6 years ago today, but you may also be interested in number 31, a climate change special from July 2022. So what's happened since we last met? Well, it's the first Data Bites in a few months where we've not had to update the old ministerial resignation chart, but I have had to dig out a few of our other old indicators of political instability. First up, we're heading for our first by-election of the Parliament in Runcorn and Helsby. Here are all the by-elections back to 1979. The party who won the seat previously, you can see in the upper half, the party who won the by-election are in the lower half. And if we just look at those that changed hands, maybe not as many as you might think, until that extraordinary run during the last Parliament. Here are the previous results for that constituency. It was only created in 2024, so we've only got that and a notional result. Apparently, the Boundary Commission cares less about consistent time series data and more about democracy. National polling, though, is driving a narrative that it could be a close one with Reform challenging Labour. Now, speaking of Reform, they've not had the smoothest of months, with 1 of their 5 MPs having the whip suspended. This chart shows changes of MP allegiance by Parliament back to 1945, so that's defections, suspensions, reinstatements. The last couple of Parliaments stand out somewhat, but this one is already ticking up with 16 change of allegiance events less than a year in. It's worth noting the other 15 all involve Labour MPs, rebelling, some being reinstated, suspensions and 1 resignation. Of course, you might think that all feels rather small compared to politics on the other side of the Atlantic. He probably thought he was putting tariffs on the chocolate bar. But maybe we're being harsh about the Trump administration. Obviously, we're not. Just humour me for a few minutes. Now, admittedly, those of us who care about open government have been perturbed by data sets disappearing and accountability atrophying. But actually, sharing sensitive defence secrets with senior journalists is boldly pushing the boundaries of open government. Some people might think paying people to vote Republican in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election could, if you squint hard enough, be construed as the very definition of political corruption. but maybe it's actually encouraging democracy by helping boost the other side. You can actually see that every district went more Democrat than in the presidential election. It's also a mirror image of what's happened to Tesla stocks. Now, the Trump administration is also encouraging Liberal voters abroad. Before Trump's inauguration, the Canadian Liberal Party, in red on the chart, was struggling in the polls. Look what's happened to them since. And Trump has encouraged Democrat politicians to, well, actually do something. This week, Senator Cory Booker delivered the longest ever filibuster, a speech which blocks a vote, at over 25 hours. There is the all-time top 10. Now, 25 hours is a long time. It's longer than the 7.2 hours of my life I've spent introducing Data Bytes. It's longer than the longest audiobook by Nadine Dorries. Remember her? It's almost as long as Michelle Donnellan's record-breaking 2022 stint as Education Secretary. But it's not even half as long as the 57.6 hours of amazing content you'll have heard from 220 different speakers across 216 Data Byte slots by the end of this evening. And before we get to that, there is, of course, one more Trump chart for you. This was how far through this Trump term we were last time out, and this is where we are now. We're now 5% of the way through, and if you count his first term, we're more than halfway there. Unfortunately, he said he'll try to seek a third term, which would take us from that to that. But let's turn to tonight's Environment and Sustainability Special, Data Bytes. Now, in the 6 years of Data Bytes, these have been the average global temperatures by month, which take on greater significance when we add in all the years back to 1950. Issues around climate change, the environment and sustainability have risen up the agenda in recent years, and now so is digital sustainability, given the energy, water and mineral costs of tech and the wider consequences of that. In fact, just yesterday, minimise environmental impact was added to the government design principles. I was actually lucky enough to chair an entire conference on digital sustainability in government a few weeks ago, which you can watch online after tonight. Environment-focused organisations have also long been at the forefront of innovative uses of data. Some of you may remember OpenDEFRA and its target to open up data sets. As you can see from that quote, the Secretary of State at the time was very excited about that. Whatever happened to her? Our first speaker tonight, joining us virtually, will be Ismail Berdu from DWP, who you saw a couple of slides ago, on digital sustainability in government. Our second speaker, also joining us virtually, will be Matt Fry from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology on data sharing in hydrological research and beyond. Our third presentation, back in the building, will be Isaac Beevor from Climate Emergency UK and Alex Parsons from My Society on how they measure UK local authority climate action through their biannual Council Climate Action scorecards. And our fourth and final presentation this evening will come from Liz Lutgendorf of the North London Waste Authority on why tracking waste is hard. The next Data Bytes will be on Wednesday the 7th of May. Speakers include Laura Gilbert, formerly of 10DS and I.AI, and we'll have another Environment and Sustainability special for you on Wednesday the 4th of June. We'll have speakers from the Environment Agency and from the GDS1 login team on building a green digital service. We're also speaking to DEFRA and DESNES about presenting during the year. I can also exclusively reveal that we'll be squeezing an extra Data Bytes in between 55 and 56. And we'll be taking it on the road to Liverpool. So keep your eyes peeled for further details of that. If you work for a public sector organisation and would like to speak or know someone who should, come and speak to me afterwards or email events@public.digital. And if you enjoy Data Bytes, the only tariff we ask from you is that you tell a friend, especially if they work in the public sector, or share something you hear tonight on social media. There'll also be video, audio and slides available for you to share in the next few days. That is definitely more than enough from me. I've run over so much that Neil has hidden the timer. So let's go to our first speaker for this evening, and that is Ismail.
Evening, everyone. Thanks, Gavin, for that introduction. I'm going to try and stay out of politics and stick to digital sustainability. So this is just a little introduction of what's happening across government. There's a lot of activity. Gavin sort of introduce some of that, and I'll just sort of give you some background before we go into that. This is just a short profile of myself. I think if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's a good follow. And I'm one of the few people across government who's working on the problem of digital sustainability. So just some context about my department. So we serve around 20 million citizens. At some point, most people in this country will interact with us, whether it's through being born or taking on a pension or even ending your life. Eventually, you'll probably have some interaction with us. It's almost guaranteed. We have around 100,000 staff and contractors. I like to point out we're bigger than the British Army. We spend about £1 billion per year on IT, 5,000 ICT specialists, and AI is a big part of our transformation. And obviously, we have a significant environmental footprint. Now, if we look around the world, what's happening, we're seeing a growing sense of disquiet, I think, around the impact of digital on our environment. And that's, as Gavin alluded to, is things like water use, but like power use, land use, and so forth. Just a few images from different countries. You can see South America, the United States, Ireland, looks like Holland as well. There's various movements that are pushing back against the rise of digital and data. And, this is, I think, having other repercussions in terms of people's attitudes towards the way technology is maybe controlling their lives, or a sense of loss of autonomy. So to go beyond some of the superficial things, this is from the United Nations Digital Economy Report, and they've looked at the way that digitization is spread around the world. And we can see that if we look at this is showing the number of devices and connections per person by region. And you can see North America, Western Europe, we're looking at sort of between 8 and 12, 13 devices per person. So there's definitely a problem of inequality in terms of where digital is being consumed, and how we can address some of these inequalities is really a key thing for me personally. Now, AI is being talked a lot about in this space, the way that AI is now consuming more resources than was originally thought a few years ago when people set their net zero targets. So going back to sort of 2019, 2020, Microsoft and other companies set very ambitious net zero targets to be net zero or even carbon negative by 2030 or shortly afterwards. What's actually happened is they've moved in the opposite direction. They're actually increasing their emissions through the growth of data centers, AI systems. Just the rise of digital is now pushing these climate targets out of reach, it would seem. So there is real concern in the industry that digital is no longer the sort of the clean technology it was talked about, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Artificial intelligence is another driver of resource consumption. So one email, for example, is thought to consume around half a liter of water. And there's a good website. There's Save the AI is a sort of a spoof website about the need of AI to feed its hungry energy and water things. And if I think about myself, I need about 8 glasses of water per day. But if I were to move my email habits to AI, this is roughly the amount of water I'd need for AI to run my email for me. So we're not in a sustainable situation with digital in general. A lot of stuff coming out of France, which is quite interesting. This is the most recent report by greenit.fr, is a French digital sustainability group. And they looked at, so we sometimes hear in this space that digital consumes around 4% or produce about 4% of CO2 globally, which sounds like a small percentage. It's more than aviation, but it still seems small. But if we were to live within planetary boundaries and think about what's the actual amount we can consume or emit without endangering life on Earth, then digital is actually producing about 40% of emissions for a 2-ton carbon lifestyle, and maybe a third of resources. So it's over-consuming, and we need to rethink our relationship with digital and data. And this is a question I ask sometimes: are we building a future that no one actually wants? We're driving ourselves forward to this techno future, but is it something that is in service of life and the planet? So the United Nations is calling for a rethink around digital sustainability, where we have some places have insufficient digitization, so socially unsustainable digitization. So, for example, access to education or information and so forth might be in a shortfall in developing countries, and in countries like ours in the global north, we have a surplus of data and IT and so forth. And it's about moving into that safe space of the donut economics model, where there's enough digital but not an overconsumption of it. And similarly, that there's talks of digital sobriety. So this is the green IT thing from France again, and they're talking about a quadrupling almost of emissions from digital by 2030 2050 without some sort of rethink of our relationship to digital and data. Now, what's happening in the government, where I am closely involved with different departments, collectively we've come together, and I think historically the civil service has tried to solve problems by departments. So you have Ministry of Defense deals with one thing, taxation something else, health and disability for another department. But with something like climate change, it's not the job of DEFRA to solve climate change. It's every department needs to think about their relationship with the climate, the environment. And for that reason, I've been working very closely with departments. GDS is very involved in this. DEFRA is very closely involved. Ministry of Justice, HMRC, I could list a lot of different departments that we're working with. And there's a real push now to make our digital services as sustainable as possible and as small a footprint as possible. So there's also, in addition to that, we've got a group called the GDSA, which is the Government Digital Sustainability Alliance. And this is a collaboration between the private sector, some of the big IT companies, but some of the small ones as well, collaborating with UK government to come up with buying standards, reporting standards, circular economic principles and things, and embedding that much deeper in the way we buy technology and deliver technology. We're still at the early stages, so there's a lot of work to do. But I think there's very positive signs. One of the things I can mention is that DEFRA has published these greener services principles, which I've helped shape a little bit. And these are 10 principles for greener services, so sort of a set of guidelines that service designers and delivery people can use, that backed up by evidence and training and so forth. In my own department, we're producing a carbon calculator. So this is a personal emissions calculator for your digital footprint. So you can see your digital habits, like your use of emails and Teams and your file habits of saving files and things, number of devices you have, and it'll give you like a little bit of an eco rating and help you think about your own relationship to digital. So that's something we're rolling out, hopefully to the entire of DWP by the end of the summer. We'll see sort of how that works out, but that's the ambition. And as Gavin mentioned in the introduction, this is the first update to the design principles since 2012. So, more than a decade's gone past. We haven't really thought about this until quite recently. And there's now this new 11th principle, minimize environmental impact. And I think it's a nice, succinct, short little chunk of text that describes the mission that we're on to reduce our environmental impact, but also not just for ourselves, but create hopefully a cascading effect. And other countries will hopefully take on board some of these principles and learn from what we're doing as well. I think the final thing I wanted to sort of talk about is that we often think there's no choice. We don't have the ability to change the course of our direction. And this is Holland, 1978. You can see the heavy traffic and things, and the decision made, we can rework our relationship to our built environment and produce a more human-friendly, planet-friendly cityscape. And even in London, I've seen big changes in the way that cycling is now much more doable than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So we do have the ability to change things, and sometimes we can forget that. If you want to learn more, I'm going to be doing a longer session called the Digital Impact Pitch. There's a couple of sessions in April. There's another one in May. This is a remote or in-person event where we spend 60 minutes kind of exploring the whole topic of digital sustainability. I think I've done 8 minutes. I think that's about on time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ishmael. And while we wait for you to appear on screen, oh, there you are, excellent. Just a reminder to everyone, you can put questions to Ishmael via Slido, which is bit.ly/databytes54, all lowercase if you're not already there. But I'm going to start with questions in the room, so I'll ask people to put their hands up in a second. Please do tell us who you are, if you can. Remember, we are on the record. Please wait for the mic, and please do keep your questions short, as the timer will start with the first question. So, who would like to ask a first question of Ishmael? I'll start at the back and we'll come down to the front next.
Hi, Alex Blanford, University of Oxford. I'm really happy with the service standard getting the extra point. That it was wonderful to see. It's a shame it took a long time to get there. With the GDSA, I hadn't heard of that before. How do we think, not straying too far into politics, but acknowledging that politics exist and seeing exactly what's happened with environmental pledges from companies in the US, why do we trust Capgemini, Microsoft and IBM to participate in setting standards on environmental reporting when it is in their interests for it to be loose and weak on them?
That's a very good question. It is, I think it has the risk of straying into politics, but we are setting the standards for measurement and reporting. And there are international standards emerging. So there's something called the Software Carbon Intensity Standard, which is an ISO standard. There's groups like the Green Software Foundation who are setting principles and things. So I think we're trying to treat each supplier equally and come up with a common set of measurement standards. And it could be, because this is still an emerging area, that we have we're looking at sort of a gold, silver, bronze standard of measurement. So, a gold standard would be you can produce all the auditable evidence, and a very poor standard might be, it's just an estimate, or maybe we're using cost-based estimates to sort of take a guess at your emissions. That's the sort of, we're looking for location-based embodied carbon, using the carbon intensity of the UK grid. So it's all transparent, and that's the goal.
Great, thank you. We've got a question right down at the front. Wait for the mic. Sorry, Liz.
Sorry. Do we know which of all the big cloud providers are the most sustainable, given their usual reticence to publish anything about it, and our ubiquitous reliance on them? Yeah,
there's two answers to that question. One is, which is the most sustainable? We don't know, because they don't tell us. We do, from the sort of reporting standards of the three big ones, Google is generally accepted to be the most transparent. Microsoft is a bit behind that, and then in third place is Amazon. That's the sort of general consensus in their methodologies, the tools they have. I think we're seeing, I do work with Amazon a bit, and they do have shown some signs recently of improving their methodology and being more transparent. And then there's other ones, Scaleway and OVC from France, which have sort of higher standards. Generally speaking, the improvements are coming from the continent, where you see France, Denmark, Holland, Germany have higher standards of reporting and transparency. The US is a little, still lagging behind, I think.
Thank you. Next question. Please do raise your hand if you've got one.
Ollie Clifton Moore, UKHSA. The Prime Minister announced reductions to the civil service of, I think it was 15%, and partly that was going to be achieved through AI. Clearly, if we don't have AI, there's a carbon impact of people doing their jobs. Would the increase in carbon from use of AI offset the reduction in the number of civil servants? Or is that too hard an equation to solve?
Yeah. I've been asked this question before. I wouldn't want to comment on it. I have seen carbon estimates where they say, well, let's compare an artist drawing a picture versus an AI drawing a picture. I don't think those kind of comparisons are very helpful. Unless we're talking about eliminating people completely physically from the earth, they're still going to be producing carbon. Whether they produce carbon by working the civil service or by doing another job doesn't really matter, because it's a global problem we're trying to solve. And removing it off the civil service balance sheet to have them go and work somewhere else doesn't actually help us. There's other questions around AI, but I think, trying to weigh up job creation or job elimination versus AI helps your individual organization's accounting, but not any global or even nationwide reporting.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, I think there's a hand up that I can't see. Sorry.
Hi, thank you. I hope this isn't too too spicy a question. In terms of the regulations you talked about, in terms of putting the burden on sort of government departments to consider their carbon output, is there a risk of what's become known as everythingism in doing this? In the sense that would it not be more effective to intervene and sort of worry about how to decarbonize data centers at the point of, the rules around building data centers, rather than putting it as like an extra line on the list of regulations or specification on how individual departments work, because that's just going to slow down delivery and so on of what the department's actually trying to do. If you're adding an extra thing in, if you see what I mean.
Well, let's think of a simpler example. So if we think of like fast food or junk food in supermarkets, should we blame the fast food producers or blame the people for consuming junk food? We need to look at both. There needs to be closer regulation and oversight of data centers, which is happening in Europe a lot. I'm hoping more will happen here. But also, it's very easy to overconsume. So as a government department, you can buy too much equipment. You can overconsume, over-provision digital services. That's very easy to do. So there needs to be a combined effort where, we hold suppliers to account. Data centers have closer scrutiny, but also individually, we need to be mindful of our consumption. We can't just assume that the data center will take care of it. We've seen many examples in our department and others where, servers are left switched on, or test systems are running 24/7, or people show up for work with 3 laptops because of security restrictions. There's all kinds of examples in government where we're over-consuming, and I'm sure we can find it in all parts of society, not just government.
Thanks. I think we've got time for one final question. I'll come back to the room. Otherwise, we've got one down here.
In terms of the design guideline, eco-friendly design guideline, and you said it is supposed service designer, you said, but I think existing service designers are kind of far away from sustainability, and they may not understand the reason behind. And what do you think about education or capacity building for that kind of people?
Absolutely. That's the first step, is education. So the principle is not a clear set of rules and guidance. It's something we're aspiring to. And it's the same as, meet user needs is another principle. So we need to educate and empower our workforce, build capability, build into the job description. So it's something we consider alongside security or accessibility or user needs. We're not adding some completely new thing that no one's ever thought of before. We're just integrating it into the existing roles we have to make sure that when you're designing a system, you're thinking a little bit about sustainability before you make a decision. So education is absolutely, very important.
Fantastic, and a very good message to end on. Ismail, thank you for such a brilliant introduction to all of the issues as we have this environmental sustainability special and the next one in a couple of months. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And thanks for the questions. Great questions. I like challenging questions. We'll move on.
Thank you. Excellent. So our second presenter tonight is also joining us virtually, and that is Matt. Hopefully, Matt can hear me. Well, we can see your slides, Matt. That's a good start.
Well, that's a good start. Can you hear me as well?
We can indeed.
Fantastic. Thanks.
All yours.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, thanks for inviting me, first of all. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. And I'm going to share a few slides this evening on an area that I work, which is hydrological research, and just to talk about how we manage and share our data in research and how that gets used beyond research. So just a very quick bit. I'm from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, whereas I'm an environmental informatics manager, so managing data is all my main focus. CEH in general is a world-leading independent research institute, so it carries out environmental science that reaches right through to impact. So we work both on our own fundamental research, but also working on building infrastructures and data sets to support the wider research community. So making sure that the environmental research in the UK and more widely is possible. And we do a lot of that through partnerships, both with government, businesses, NGOs, and more widely. So in terms of our hydrological research, again, just to reiterate, we undertake our own kind of research into floods, water resources, water quality and ecosystems. And some of that research, for example, into floods, feeds directly through to the way that flood risk is managed in the UK. So it's the science behind flood risk estimation, flood risk mapping, and similarly for water resources, science behind predicting droughts in the future under climate change, these sorts of things. So very important areas of research and very important data. And a lot of the way that we support research, as well as do our own research, is through that provision of data. So management and provision of data is very important. So what type of data are we talking about? It's both our own data that we produce, so through long-term research monitoring. So for example, this is a network that we run of 50 soil moisture sites. So probably the biggest, most dense soil moisture networks in the world, certainly the most dense, providing information on changes in soil moisture that can lead through to insights into areas of flooding and drought, for example. And we make those sorts of measurements across lots of areas of terrestrial and freshwater science, on whether that's in biodiversity monitoring, air pollution, all sorts of things. So yeah, we obviously have to make that data accessible and make use of that data, but we also help collate existing UK environmental monitoring data, for example, from the Environment Agency, but also SEPA and Natural Resources Wales, because we're working UK-wide, and making that as accessible as possible to researchers. And the examples I've got there, as mentioned earlier, about DEFRA's Open Data Initiative, which has been fantastic and delivered with aplomb by the Environment Agency in relation to their hydrological data, which is fantastically accessible and has made a huge difference both to the way that we work with that data and the way that the wider research community makes use of it. So I'm going to focus on that type of data in a moment, but just to kind of recap in terms of what researchers actually want from data, they obviously want it to be accessible. They're really interested in completeness and quality control so that they know they don't have to do a lot of work on the quality of that data before making use of it in their research. They want it fully described, so there's metadata behind that to understand how to filter that data out, which data to make use of. They want it analysis ready, so whether that's data formats or whether that's end user tools, R packages, for example, to pick up and use that data, reading that data through APIs. And they also, which probably a particular aspect for the research community, want it with a DOI, so it's sitting there with long-term access for reproducibility of that research. And obviously this chimes with everybody working in data, that those are essentially fair aims. So fair is the key to what we're trying to do. So yeah, back to that example where we take data from the Environment Agency and other organisations on river flows and make it accessible. So we do a huge amount of work on preparing that data, delivering it through interfaces, but also providing background technical information on the quality of that information that people can dig into. And these are used by researchers, but also by those flood consultants who are making use of this data for flood risk assessments. So all of these stations get used every time a flood risk assessment is made. And the best consultants will be digging into those stations and understanding the data that goes behind those flood risk assessments. We provide information, spatial data on the catchments, the land cover, variability, the geology in those for those stations and those sorts of things so people can really understand that data. We provide an R package to pull that data through our API and allow people to directly apply hydrological analyses. And we're also providing packaged up kind of AI ready data packages of that data with a DOI that will sit there in the long term. So that's what we do at the moment, what we've been doing. We produce a huge amount of statistics on this. These are all on our website. We get 40,000 downloads of files of data from our website. hundreds of thousands of calls on our API, masses of use of the website to actually go and understand that information about those monitoring sites. This is a new initiative that we're 1 year into a 5-year build, and this is, I've underlined the words research infrastructure here, so it's the Floods and Droughts Research Infrastructure. It's infrastructure funding from UKRI, and it's providing funding both to undertake new measurements in 3 catchments across the country, intensive measurements of the water cycle, but also a digital infrastructure to deliver this data. It's really focused on improving access both to that new data, but also existing hydrological data that's currently not as well accessible as that data from the EA. We're also focused on innovation, so how we take forward the management and dissemination of data from drones, cameras, video, new sources of environmental data, and supporting the research and wider community and accessing this data is important. And just an example of that, of why that's important, is an opportunity to try to gather together that data that's really important, making it fair for things like natural flood management measures, where the actual monitoring data behind the evidence is actually quite hard to access at the moment. So if we really want robust evidence, we need robust data. And the final point I'd like to make, so one of the activities we're undertaking within that program, that infrastructure, is a focus on standards, and in particular standards for sensor data interoperability. So we're looking at data models that help describe our monitoring networks, sites, the instruments that are deployed at those sites, how those instruments, the technical specifications of those, and how those produce particular data sets, so that any users of this data set can both search across the data sets using all of these aspects of the data model, but also make use of that metadata when they've got that data. They can really understand how that data was produced. So we've been working on, these are existing standards that we're implementing, and we're working across other research organizations and others, including in the past we've had discussions across government departments about standards for sensor data. And I think I'm going to leave it there, if that's okay. Please sign up for a newsletter interested in FDRI, or please feel free to get in touch with me directly if you're interested in hydrological or environmental data. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And bang on time as well. While we wait for your face to appear on our screen, a reminder that you can put questions on Slido, which is bit.ly/databytes54, or lowercase if you're not there already. Hello, Matt. We can see you on screen. Thank you very much for that. I'll come to the room for the first question. Who would like to go first? I've got one down there.
Hi, I'm Matt Curlow from the University of Oxford. I thought it was really interesting talking the new initiative you've got, which is about floods and droughts. It made me think about to what extent is, obviously, historically, we're quite a wet country, and lots of our environmental stuff has been about floods. But to what extent is like climate change affecting sort of the need for data on droughts, and particularly sort of been living in the southeast of and sort of aware of sort of having had sort of water restrictions in the past. It's going to be a future for us as well.
I'm glad you said what's the importance of the need for data. You're not asking me to make a statement about our future dependency on water dependencies. That need for data is increasingly important. There's been a lot of activity both through the Environment Agency and recently through DESNZ to look at future kind of climate scenarios and how these will affect water. So it's obviously important for water resources and drought, but for future energy infrastructure. There was a program called CS Now. It's just completed last week with DESNZ, looking at making sure we can understand where there'll be water available to site those water-intensive energy-producing infrastructures of the future. So moving to net zero, making sure we've got the information both for farming and agriculture, but for the environment and but also for energy locations. And there was a whole run of the UK climate projections produced by the Met Office are obviously things like the weather, temperatures and rainfall projections into the future for the next 100 years. And we do work with the Environment Agency and others to take that data, run it through hydrological models, and see how that translates into water resources and availability in the future. So if you go to look for the CS Now and what I think it's called Future Water Resources, there's a whole web portal with projections of that data and maps and things like that, and you can dig in for yourself and try and understand what it's saying.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question, we've got one just there.
Hi, my name's Joanna. So it sounds like what you have here is a tool to make hydrological data or data available for people who work in a specific field. Are you doing any work to push this data onto other fields, so in social research? Because I'm assuming there's lots of interesting insights to be gained from cross-referencing this kind of data with levels of disparity or other types of data like that.
Yeah, we do try to build those interfaces to make them as accessible as possible for a wide range of people. We know they have a lot of public use, and we capture metrics on broad sectors that access and use those data sets. So as well as kind of hydrological consultants, there's lots of citizen science groups make use of that data. There's a huge amount with the Rivers Trusts and other organisations working in rivers nowadays. So we're aware that they need to access that. So it's not overly technical, the access points to that data. I'd say we don't necessarily specifically reach out to particular communities, other potential uses of that, and something would be interesting to think about. But yeah, I guess we're just trying to make it as plain and simple to access as possible through those interfaces.
Great, thank you. Next question. Otherwise, you're going to make me ask one, and you don't want that. Matt, you touched a bit on, I suppose, new sources of data. You used sort of drones as one example. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about some of those more novel data sources, and if there are particular characteristics, concerns, consequences of having to think about those.
Yeah, there's a lot people are testing and they're coming through in the private sector, and we're at that stage of kind of understanding how useful they are for research, I guess, for making high quality measurements in the environment. So we've got colleagues with thermal cameras on drones, and those thermal video cameras can pick up movements in the surface of the river that you can then use AI to turn into a sort of velocity profile across the river. You can then integrate that with your knowledge of the shape of the cross section of that river and calculate the flow from that. So it's incredibly quick and easy way to make those sorts of measurements. But it comes with a lot of challenges. So if you want to just take a drone out to a river, make a measurement, you need that cross-section information. So trying to integrate data from across the country that's available is really important. Then processing that data takes a lot more energy, as we've just heard in the last talk. But the sort of storage of that sort of drone data is increasingly important to be thinking about. I think at the moment we've got UAV operators who take a memory stick and keep it on their hard drive and those sorts of things. But we're looking at building, again, metadata standards to capture basic information about drone flights and instruments that are on those drones, and catalogs to allow people to search those and access them, and then storing that data in accessible ways. So yeah, they're both really interesting for the measurements, but there's a whole load of challenges around the data management and access to that data behind them. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll come back to the room for the next question. We've got one just down there.
Thank you. My name is Kasim. I work for the UNDP at the Digital for Planet initiative. Will you speak about digital infrastructures? Can you elaborate more in terms of? I mean, I'm familiar with the term, but what kind of digital infrastructures do you think are more important or most important for environmental impact from research perspective, monitoring, sensors, etc., etc.?
So yeah, that's a good question. I guess I think of it as I guess we're talking about digital research infrastructure, so it's infrastructures that support research, and that could be anything from like I was saying just then, the way that we structure and store that data and make that available, but obviously importantly the tools on top of that, all those standards, the consistency, the sort of pipe work that we use to make sure that data could be integrated and understood. The tools on top of that allow you to search and make use of that data. And then increasingly, we're also talking about sort of analytical platforms. So a lot of people are familiar with kind of notebook environments that researchers are increasingly using, but allowing them to run their analyses close to the data on infrastructures, or we store the data on cloud infrastructures and support them to run large-scale analysis against that data on those infrastructures. We've been doing work around platforms to allow people to share that sort of analytical code to make those kind of platforms more easy to use for people to log on over the web, find existing examples of how to analyze a data set, fine-tune them for your own use, and then kind of guidance and on how to undertake analysis across maybe a sort of large cloud platform. So it's all of that, from the basics of storage right up to the complex platforms and the guidance to help people make use of those things.
Brilliant. Well, Matt, you've run perfectly to time yet again. Maybe a Data Bytes record. But thank you very much indeed. Great to hear from you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we're back in the room, or in the room, for the next presentation, and that's from Isaac and Alex.
Cool.
So over to you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. I'm Isaac. This is
Alex.
Yeah, we're here to talk about the Council Climate Action Scorecards, which is the only UK-wide assessment of local authority climate action.
Yeah, so the two key data questions we have through the scorecards is, how do we, in a world where there isn't a lot of information about this available, build high-quality data on the climate progress being made at the local level, and then how do you use that data in the loop to create more climate progress? And that's what the scorecards do.
Just a little bit about who we are. So Climate Emergency UK, we exist to equip the council climate movement, that's both councils and campaigners, with the information and guidance needed to accelerate place-based climate action and the work of local climate campaigns. We kind of believe that you do need better data, but you actually do need more public accountability, and that's what's going to lead to greater climate action.
Similarly, my side, very similar to Theory of Change. So we run They Work For You, What Do They Know? We build big digital infrastructure and use the power of technology to sort of break down barriers and think about how we can join people and data together in useful ways.
Sweet. Just the objectives of the scorecards. So we score every UK council on their climate action. We have two main audiences, councils and campaigners. That's like the public, local residents. And we expect, we hope that councils will use the scorecards to improve and implement more effective policies and take more action. And campaigners will use the scorecards to lobby and push for greater climate action from their council as well. Our methodology, and I think this is what is actually quite special about the scorecards, we don't just focus on the kind of high emission areas like transport or buildings, but we also look at how the local government is embedding climate within their governance, within their procedures, within their planning policy, or within how they're collaborating with their businesses or local residents or schools, for example, and helping them reduce emissions. So how do we create the scorecards? Our key partner is obviously My Society. We had an advisory group who represented the council climate sector, who helped oversee the creation of the scorecards. We did a lot of sector consultation, spoke to 90 individuals or groups. One of the key things about the scorecards as well is that it's a citizen data project. So we had over 200 people actually volunteer that we train to go out and look for the publicly available information to put it together as part of the data set. We use freedom of information requests, so we have, when you include every council, which is about 400 in the UK, we send out almost 4,000 freedom of information requests. We also get councils to engage in the process as well. 76% of UK councils actually responded in the right of reply, which is really, really high engagement in the project. How are the questions scored? We vary the methodology depending on what council type there is, because the UK has an old system of local government that is we won't go into that. Confusing, yeah. We have 3 different types of data sets. So I mentioned that volunteer research, which answered about 2/3 of the questions. We use some national data, including from national organisations that already compile that. As I said, freedom of information requests as well. The results, obviously, from 2023, when we last produced the scorecards, there are only 41 UK councils that scored over 50%. You can see the range here is really vast, from about 9% up to about 60% for the highest scorers, with the average score around 30% in the scorecards. In terms of the impact that we had, We've had over 170,000 users of the website. We've picked up references of councils using the scorecards, whether that's in reports, in questions, in council meetings, or even referencing the scorecards in press releases. We've trained over 500 residents, partnering with 14 different organisations, and we know dozens of campaign groups are using the scorecards as well. We had over 200 media hits when we launched, and we've been referenced by some of the Skidmore reports that came out. We've been referenced in the Climate Change Committee and also by the Future Generation in Wales as well. This is an actual case study that we're picking up from councils of how the scorecards have worked or increased or led to greater climate action. So South Cambridgeshire said that once Climate UK highlighted this gap, we were able to make the case to senior colleagues there was a need and value in investing staff time into skills and training on climate change. They massively expanded their carbon literacy programme, and it's now led to a greater understanding of climate throughout the organisation in stimulating climate action from the different departments as well.
Yeah, so behind the scenes of all this fun stuff is sort of how do we do the baseline technical things behind the scenes. So to get to the point where you can ask these questions about sector-specific stuff, we need the basic foundational data sets. So at a very basic level, we need a list of all the local authorities, which effectively My Society now maintains, taking on what was previously produced by the government in the Registers Project. Similarly, we've had to stitch together various official data sets, such as a UK-wide IMD, to create useful frame-ins for ways of exploring this data. The way that lots of this data is produced through crowdsourcing, we produced a unique crowdsourcing software for this project that both helps volunteers gather information and evidence for each question, helps Climate Imagine oversee the results, but also inside the same platform provides a right of reply to authorities. So local authorities get an email with a sign-in, they can then go in and see their own marks, leave comments, Climate Imagine then review that, audit that, and this all happens inside the same platform. So we sort of got a nice automated version of the climate emergency flow. On the freedom of information request that made up a number of questions on the projects, What Do They Know is our site where people can make freedom of information requests, and the results of these are then available to be seen in the public. A project we're running inside this is something we call What Do They Know projects, and what this sort of combines is the ability to send one request to many authorities, but then add a crowdsourcing layer on the back of that. So say a question was asked to all the district councils, Climate Emergency volunteers could then log into something within What Do They Know and extract the answers to questions inside What Do They Know that they can be piped back to Grace to put the results back together. So in that way, we're trying to make it easier to get information out of freedom of information and back into more structured forms that can be combined with other forms of data.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I don't really understand some of the stuff that happens. We released our scorecards successes report in exactly last year, which is actually quite freaky. In terms of what the scorecard success report looked at is what can councils do that will enable more climate action? Obviously, some of those things are quite obvious. Having like political leadership, so a portfolio holder that's like a councillor who's a climate lead, access to funding, publishing their strategies, having an ambitious target, reporting on their emissions, embedding climate within their risk register was shown that councils that had done that had all achieved higher scores. Interestingly, though, if you were a council that had cross-party representation as part of your governing party, you actually scored lower on the scorecards, which was quite interesting. The other thing that we looked at is we produced these infographics which pull out some of the headline stats from the scorecards. We do think that having a climate statutory duty, as there used to be in 2008 to 2010 before being removed by the coalition government, would improve local climate governance and reporting. There is still a statutory duty in Scotland. There is kind of a statutory duty from the public sector in Wales. To give you an example, every Scottish council has to report on their climate action and their emissions. Only about 60% of English councils report on their climate action and emissions. So we think that's one of the key benefits. Oh, this is the timeline. Sorry, yeah. We're producing the scorecards again. That happened in 2023. The next scorecards are being launched in June 2025, so they're just coming out. This also kind of demonstrates some of the part of the process and timeline for the scorecards. So we go through a first mark where we work with a lot of the volunteers. We get that right of reply from councils, and then we go through a scoring audit, which we've just finished literally 2 days ago, where we kind of review and make sure the marking is as consistent and as accurate as possible. And then finish.
Yeah, I mean, you've just said this a few slides ago, so we can end exactly on time.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Sweet.
A reminder, if you're watching us online, you can submit questions via Slido, bit.ly/databytes54, all lowercase if you're not already there. And if you want a really controversial question from the room, you can use that as well. But we would obviously like you to put your hands up if you're in the room. So who would like to go first? Plenty to dig into there.
Hi, Alex, fellow member of Alex Club. Hi, Alex. My society makes lots of things that struggle with how you make an argumentation, how you make an argument with data. And this is a great, I love this and the other sort of dashboard thing you've been doing with local government recently, but like, how do you manage the politics of making a statement about a council that they might not like? When you want to be a neutral provider of data?
So we can answer that in a few different ways. One of which is my society being slightly more neutral is we work with partners who can be slightly less neutral, like Isaac here. So essentially that's sort of the way that we've sort of managed that is like it is important to an extent to reward success, and that's sort of how we sort of go like it's nice to reward success, but also not everyone's doing well and that has to be drawn out. So I think it is definitely a difficult thing to manage in trying to be seen as neutral and effective. At the same time, all the work, sorry, I'm just saying what a great job you did.
Thank
but
you.
Like the methodology Climate Emergency do, the way that councils are involved in the steering group, and especially like early critics that are brought in steering group, reflections of how the process works. There is sort of an effective way to bring people on board, because it doesn't work if people just dismiss it as this is a biased thing that doesn't go anywhere. People have to like begrudgingly accept it, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as the people who take the rap from councils if they don't like their score, one of the key things is that people always told us there's a lot of pushback. Why don't you just publish the best practice examples? And we were like, well, that's not going to get anyone to improve if they're not doing a lot. You know, one of the best examples of this is Nottingham have had a workplace parking levy, which was just John Prescott's great idea from the early 2000s, and no one else has done it in the UK because there's not that public pressure on them to do it from councils across the UK. And I think that if you don't have that public pressure on those councils that aren't doing as much, who deserve to be called out, then they're just not going to improve, or they're not going to have any base of that. One of the things that a local government officer once said to us is, and this maybe reflects on government and local councils as well, is the two greatest drivers of action in government are shame and envy. And the scorecards to an extent tap into that. People that want to be doing better, they're envious of not being at the top if they think they should be, or people that don't want to be doing a lot, but actually we're there to say that they're not, then they actually maybe are ashamed of that and want to be doing better. And so, yeah, the scorecards lean into that to an extent.
Shame and envy might be the most succinct theory of change I've ever heard.
The thing is, the whole audience nodded though. I was a little bit like, oh no, this is not going to go well, but everyone nodded. I was like, okay, it's fine.
Yeah. Shared experience.
Yeah.
Who would like to ask the next question? We've got one there.
Hi, David Durant. On your timeline, you talked about improving the quality of the data.
Yeah.
And when you're working with a lot of citizen volunteers, how do you ensure you've got good data quality?
Yeah. So, that's really key for us. So we have the first mark, which you can kind of think of as a massive crowdfunding of the data, where we work with a lot more volunteers who go out and kind of try and source that data as much as possible. What we then do is we send that first mark to councils, and they can critique every single question. We know there's going to be reports that we missed. We know there's things that they may have just announced that they're hidden in their kind of like council meeting minutes that we're not going to be able to find. So the officers can respond to that, and as I said, 76% of councils actually responded, so that's a really high engagement rate there. What we then do is we have experienced volunteers from the first mark come back to audit councils, and so they're retrained again. We look at the data as Climate UK staff and pick out any areas where we think people are struggling to answer the question and try and focus on those, so we review the first mark as well. And then we go, the auditors, as they're known, are a much smaller team. So it's a much smaller team of people who have already marked from the first mark, so they're already experienced, and then they go through and kind of award the final marks with a much greater contact with Climate UK staff as well. So we're much more hands-on in the audit. The other thing that we did for the first time this year, funding allowed, was that We had paid auditors, so we had short-term research positions, which were there so people that took on a lot more councils because we were able to pay them, and that was actually really nice because we were able to give funding opportunities to people. Obviously, it's only a couple of months contract, but it was for a lot of people who were looking for their first jobs in the sector and things like that who got involved with us. So that's a great way to also kind of get that experience to then go on. Yeah,
thanks.
So that's the way we do it anyway.
Next question. Got one there.
Hi, Matt Kellogg again. You're doing you're about to release your sort of next set of results, and I guess the question I've got is whether you're, in addition to sort of all the various bits of activity that you've been measuring there, like is things in risk registers, are there portfolio holders, etc. Are you collecting any data either through this process or from other published statistics or something that actually measures the actual impact, so that you can sort of try and see whether or not improvement in these things actually tallies with real climate impact? Because at the end of the day, we need to know whether doing these things actually does lead to measurable impact and change.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will be able to obviously compare between the 2025 and 2023 scorecards to see whether there's been more, I guess, climate action across the board. It's not just answer questions on policies. We do look at other things like, have they got electric buses in their area and things like that. So we are able to compare between 2025 and 2023, and we'll be doing some of that comparison. The other thing, which I had a really good answer for this, but it just went out of my head, what we do ask, one of the questions in the governance thing is the council reporting that their emissions from the council emissions, are they reporting that they're going down with different targets of them? One of the difficulties of that is councils report their emissions differently. Every council reports there's 300 different ways of doing it, unfortunately. There's no standardised reporting. One of the reasons we think a climate strategy would be better is there'd be hopefully standardised reporting. So what we do report, one of the questions does look at, our council emissions going down, but we have to take it with a massive pinch of salt because we don't know what those councils are necessarily including in some of those emissions totals. I mean, some of them are really extensive, and some of them are just like today I looked at a council and they said the emissions we're reporting on our buildings, our street light and our fleet vehicles, and that was it. And there's nothing on their procurement, nothing on anything else, services they buy. That was all the reporting for the council emissions.
There were definitely some eye rolls at the lack of data standards, as you were saying that, I think. Yeah. We've got time for a final quick question. Otherwise, I will pose one, which is, what advice would you give to anybody undertaking a citizen data project?
You can go first.
Well, we tried to copy climate emergency methodology to do some research around registers of interest earlier in the year. So it is sort of, you can't change once you've started. So the big thing we sort of learned from that is it's much easier to get it right at the start and to overhire volunteers and then wean down later on was sort of our impression of things, that it's hard to scale up, it's easier to scale down and go quicker if you small scope if you can at first and expand from there. Just it's okay to get data that's a bit fuzzy the first time round, and that's sort of one of the interesting lessons about say the Scottish emissions standard is it started as I think an academic or a climate environmental. It was outside the government, and they asked everyone for information. They did it for a few years, and the Scottish government adopted it. And it's one of those things where it doesn't matter if the data's not comparable the first year. The fact you publish it all in the same place encourages a certain amount of herding. So there is a sense of just getting started, doing something that's good, and then getting better at it. And just it's good to have information that's fuzzy rather than information that doesn't exist.
Yeah, getting started, I think, is just one of the key things. I think that you can be too nervous about collecting the best quality data sometimes that you can, but sometimes just having the process of going out and trying to collect data is actually one of the key impacts, because then councils start to actually report their data because suddenly they're like, we need to report this because we want to do better in the scorecards, and they actually make their public reports better and their websites are better. It
really helps people to know someone somewhere wants what you're publishing. There's a lot of stuff that the councils are required to publish that they also kind of know no one cares about, and so knowing that there is a user who is going to maybe publish not nice things, but at the same time actually cares about what you're doing. It's a very helpful loop.
Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, Isaac, Alex, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
which brings us to our final speaker of the evening, and that's Liz.
Hi. Wait for my slides to appear. Do I have to press the button?
They will appear.
Did I break it?
Can you see it on the screen there?
It says choose mirror from the menu.
Ah. It's a Thursday evening and the system is tired.
Fair. My favorite thing about technology is that PowerPoints and printers never get easier.
Can we add Microsoft Teams to that list?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Other flawed video conferencing software is available. And it wouldn't be a tech-related event without a slight tech snafu.
It's back on here.
Excellent. That means we might be about to get it on the screen. Maybe we need a test card like the BBC used to have. Maybe you can hold that up to the
It now says PPT 6 times, so maybe it's celebrating the 6th anniversary of DataBytes. It's there again. It's just not there.
It's just not there.
Yay! Yay! Thanks for having me. So I'm from the North London Waste Authority, at least for the next month. And if you don't know, the North London Waste Authority disposes of waste on behalf of 7 London Borough Councils. Other waste authorities are available in other councils. And I think we manage about 3% of the UK's household waste. So I'm the Senior Digital Transformation Manager, and I was essentially brought on to fix things like data, partially in response to this, which was mandatory digital waste tracking. And when I joined in January 2012, this was a very big thing, and I was told it was imminent. I'm now leaving, still not there. I'm kind of like putting this out as my unsolicited user research, which I was never contacted for. So it's a good policy, I think. Tracking is trying to look at things and stopping things like illegal waste dumping or fly tips or illegal exporting, but also enhancing or like encouraging the circular economy where we're reusing all these materials within the UK. And also just tracking how waste is disposed of, including hazardous and non-hazardous waste. I think is great, but of course the devil is always in the details. And I think from my experience in working with data in a waste authority and looking at all this 3% of waste, these are the areas that I think are really hard. One, really messy data. My data points are vehicles with loads of different types of rubbish or recycling in a big truck going over a weighbridge. It's not very orderly sometimes. The idea of real-time tracking, which was in the policy, I find especially interesting given the kind of realities of waste disposal. And also, it's primarily a business. All of the kind of organizations involved a lot of the time are businesses and looking to make a profit. And so a lot of the data is actually contract and finance data rather than specifically waste tracking data. Cool. So let's talk about what happens to your waste. So it gets picked up by your council, and several things can happen to it, including one of these. Gets taken to a waste transfer station, gets taken to incinerator, gets taken to landfill, maybe another option. But in all aspects, it gets put in a giant pile as a first step in its journey. And this is a view of a giant piles. These are bunkers for an incinerator. They hold about 8,000 kilograms of residual waste. Residual waste is everything that can't be recycled. And then a big claw, a literal big claw, picks it up and puts it in a hopper, which takes it to an incinerator. So you can see from this point, tracking after this point is just a mathematical construct and proportions of what is disposed of by different facilities. You can't really track it from the point of entry back to the original owner because it's with lots of original owners. The other thing that happens, because it's a business, is that it changes its name every time that it's moved. So when it arrives at a facility, it might come on as refuse or residual. Dust literally goes back to the 18th century to dust carts collecting waste. That's how fast we move in waste. So that is because it has a gate fee attracted to it. So when you're disposing of a waste, but as a council, you pay a certain amount to a waste disposal authority to dispose of it for you. When it moves, when it's transferred, it has a haulage fee. It's a different type of contractual arrangement. So the name changes again. And then when it's processed, like in an incinerator, it changes its entire kind of makeup and changes its name again. We have process loss, so everything that was basically incinerated turns into energy. And then we'll have ash and ash metal, which both get recycled, and then some other contaminants that have to be processed as well. When I mean it changes shape and form, it does. These are the numbers from last year for our waste transfer station in Wembley. You can see that there's about 10 different waste types coming in. Those are both the kind of stuff from your house, as well as all the stuff that your borough does to keep your borough clean. And then it goes out as 4 waste types because they're just transfer types and you don't know what they are anymore. The other thing interesting to note is you can see there's a difference of what in and what out, and I will get to that in a minute. But it can change again. So once you've actually incinerated it, in my case, it can change again. So we've sent some ash, we tested it. It turned out some of it was hazardous. We sent it to a specialist facility to handle hazardous waste. They looked at it and analyzed it and said, actually, no, some of it wasn't hazardous. And so they sent it to 5 different sites for disposal. And they're perfectly entitled to do that. All these disposal sites have what are called permitted activities as part of their business, and they have to follow specific processes to dispose of waste. So it's kind of perfectly legitimate that they decided it was different again. So your waste picked up at the curb has 4 name changes before it gets to its final destination. The current way we do this, if you are very nostalgic for DirectGov, is called waste data flow, which is the bane of my existence. And it's the current method of doing this. And like I said, it starts at the council, and it's supposed to end that 4th name change down the road. And it just becomes like a game of mathematical proportions. It's not really waste tracking in any meaningful sense. The other thing that I mentioned earlier was this idea of real-time tracking, which I find very difficult. As you saw with my Wembley data, we do not have 100% in and 100% out, and that's for 2, probably more reasons. A lot of waste is wet. A lot of it is food waste. Sometimes up to 40% of residual waste is food waste. And it dewaters. It just loses its kind of moisture as it sits in a giant pile waiting to move on to its next location. Also, you don't tend to, dispose of your giant piles on a perfectly daily, monthly, quarterly basis. And so you have an idea of called stock. It just sits there and waits to be processed. And sometimes you actually intentionally keep your stock, especially if it's recycling, because it's valuable to hold on to it for different reasons. So for example, these are the paper recycling prices for last year. And you can see they shift over the year quite a lot. And if you're a materials recovery facility and you have your giant pile, another giant pile, of mixed recycling in the background, you can see there, you can, after it's gone through all the processes, end up with these bales of cardboard and paper. And like you said, if you're kind of processing it in November, and if you have the space as this facility, you want to hold on to that until March when it's worth a lot more money to you. And so the idea of real-time tracking, is it really real-time tracking when there is built into the system this idea that you should hold on to things for when the commodity is valuable enough? Because at the end of all these processes, they are commodities and they are available on a global market, and the prices do change because of that. So can we really track waste digitally? And this is just from my tiny perspective of one waste authority. I don't think so if we're trying to do the current method, which, to be fair, the policy doesn't want to do, which is great. But maybe if we, again, kind of lean into this idea of proportionality and the fact that you can't track it down to the ton. You have to look at the system as a whole and maybe start from the end product rather than the beginning, because at least they have gone through processes that we can actually say it's hazardous or non-hazardous and what's actually happened to at the end. So again, this is a lovely Sankey diagram from the Wembley and Hornsey Street waste transfer stations. And you can see it beautifully moves through the year. Lots of them end up at our incinerator. But there's lots of third parties. The one BIFA is recycling. SSI is actually mattress recycling, if you didn't know you could recycle mattresses. And so all of those will then have a secondary or tertiary or whatever the fourth version of that is as it moves through subsequent processing. And so maybe if we look at it that way, we can accomplish some of the policy goals. We'll know where it'll end up. We'll know if it's hazardous. We can see if there's anomalies and outs in the flows from different facilities. So maybe it can do it, but I don't know. It's very hard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Liz. I was going to say you're the first person that's spoken about rubbish data at DataBytes, which is true in one sense, but not in several others. A reminder, if you're watching us online or indeed in the room, you can submit questions via Slido, which is also bit.ly/databytes54, all lowercase. I'm going to start with an online question, because they've been a novelty tonight. Anonymous asks, what kind of technology and what kind of Internet of Things devices are used for especially real-time tracking wastes?
So it varies. So all of the different boroughs are obviously responsible for their own vehicles most of the time, or actually most of them are outsourced to other kind of big waste disposal authorities. But some will have things like they'll measure the exact weight of loads, and a lot of that has to do with differentiating between kind of commercial and household waste, because they're always co-collected. And for the purposes of reporting, Waste Data will really care where it came from, if it was a business or not a business. So there's lots of that stuff happening on vehicles. It's more interesting in the facilities. So some of the material, like there's a lot of electromagnets and really cool processes that happen to separate the waste to do that. But they're also kind of using AI to scan like hours and hours and days of like the type of materials going through to see if they can better process them. So I think it's less on the vehicle side, though there is some. But there's lots of interesting tech within the facilities themselves to actually better recycle everything. Because most people probably don't know that, but like everyone usually involved in kind of waste management is intensely interested in reducing the amount of waste, is very, very kind of conscious of it. And they all operate towards the waste hierarchy, which the first principle of the waste hierarchy is to actually produce less waste. So it's like everyone's very intensely interested in solving this in waste management as well.
Cool, thank you. Let's take a question in the room. We've got a hand up there.
Hello, Derek here. Question is, so you talked a lot about how data is used within your particular context. How is it used in other waste management systems across the UK, around the world? Like what are the other I imagine there's tons of experimentation happening. What are people trying?
It's probably in its infancy of trying to try. I'll be polite in saying that. Like I was basically the first data person in the authority, or the first tech person in our authority. And so it is kind of local level. And so the capability is a lot lower than you'd probably want to manage this amount of data. And the farther you go out into the different kind of waste disposal sites, you'll have multinational companies that are incredibly good, have incredibly good systems, are investing in AI and all of these sort of things. But then you'll have a dude with a truck, right? And he will write you a paper receipt, and that is your data. And so it really, really varies. So a lot of companies are trying to invest in actually regularizing their data as a first point of call, because it's really not that advanced. Thanks. Sadly. Sorry.
Next question. can see some people nearly going for it. Go on, you know you want to.
I'm trying to make a rubbish joke, but they've left my mind.
Oh, we'll go Matt and then Derek.
Yeah, there was a question and then it disappeared out of my head and then I was trying to remember it. But you mentioned actually how a lot of the data you have is sort of related to the sort of contracting and the sort of, obviously, the payments and like sort of the money value of all these sort of things. Is there anything within that sort of contracting process that is being done to incentivize the types of data that, like, other types of data that you might want or need?
Yeah, it does in certain respects. It kind of depends on the person who's managing the contracts, really, and the kind of linking up between strategy and operations. And so it can be good, but it's hard because, again, you're trying to get best value for, like, because we're a public body as well, and all our kind of clients, I guess, are councils. And so you're trying to have a value of the contracts that is reasonable for, cash-strapped councils to be able to pay for. And so you can't ask for too much or the price goes up and then it becomes unaffordable as a contract. So it's possible that things like waste data tracking could improve that, because if you put the onus on the kind of supplier side, the people disposing of it and hauling it, to have better data, then we can ask for it. But to ask for it independently is difficult because it costs more. And the other kind of main problem is the kind of consolidation within waste management. So like I said, there's lots of multinational companies. And there's a lot of consolidation within kind of disposal bodies and other companies. And so there's a lot of single source contracts. And again, if you're not writing this in from the point, it gets really difficult. But then there's not a lot of options if there's so much consolidation. So I think it's a difficult nut to crack because you want to provide value for money, but also meet these targets. And right now it's kind of like going like that. I hope that makes sense.
Derek again. How'd you get into this?
I got a message through LinkedIn. That's literally, I was recruited. No special thing, but I had no idea before I arrived, and it is very interesting. So if anyone, there are other, like I said, waste councils available, but it is a huge, interesting part of the economy. Like I went on about the kind of circular economy, and anything that can be recycled is recycled, right? If it's valuable as a commodity, it will be recycled. Generally, if things are not valuable, they don't get recycled. That's why we have a lot of flimsy plastics, and Tetra Paks are especially difficult to pull apart the different components. Waste electronics are really difficult. So one other way, if there's like burgeoning scientists out there, is like find ways to make a commodity out of the worst recycled products, because that's actually what's needed to improve recycling rates.
Thanks. Let's take another question. I can see people wanting to ask. We've got one there.
I don't really have a question, but I was telling a friend before coming here that I find waste management really interesting, and they laughed in my face. So
it is interesting.
It is very interesting. I guess I do kind of have a question. What role do you think charity shops and the second-hand market could have in helping track waste?
I have complex feelings about that. A lot of the stuff that charity shops trade in are not necessarily valuable commodities for recycling or reuse. So textiles, if you didn't know, recently I think the actual textile market has crashed significantly. And we do have a scheme where charities can apply to, and they get the equivalent value of what we would pay to dispose of that thing, but like 80% of it's textiles. So the idea would be pick something that is more difficult to recycle. I think even like reuse shops would be more useful, where you can, or repair shops, that's a big incentive within the councils as well, because again, waste electronics are really hard to recycle. There's a lot of them. And so if you pick those sort of things that are not really being serviced in the community, rather than kind of textiles and cups and things, you'll probably actually have better recycling rates. Because One of our waste streams is from charity shops who come in because they can't sell all their clothes, and so they're disposed of as well through incineration.
Well, that brings us perfectly to time. Liz?
Sorry for depressing you.
Not at all. Thank you very much indeed. That was fascinating. Thank you. I am the only thing between you and the free drinks at the back of the room for those of you in the room, so I'll keep this short. You can watch this event back on YouTube or Slido, which you probably know by now is bit.ly/databytes54, all lowercase. There will be a blog post which publishes some of the slides and some summaries and some photos and some audio as well. Please do share that with lots of people. The next Databytes, as you've already heard, will be on Wednesday, the 7th of May. Please do get in touch with speaker offers and suggestions. Come and speak to me or email events@public.digital. Sign up on the Public Digital website for updates, including more about the date when we'll be heading to Liverpool. All that remains for me to say a few huge thank yous to PD for hosting, as ever, to all of you for coming and some brilliant questions tonight, as Ishmael said in the very first presentation. And of course, a massive thank you to our 5 brilliant speakers this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.